I'm the NAO Director responsible for reporting on what DCLG does to Parliament and to helping MPs on the Public Accounts Committee hold it to account. The second part of my job is that I lead the NAO's work under its new powers under the Local Audit and Accountability Act, and I produce reports to the local government sector in the wake of the abolition of the Audit Commission. So one of the things that this job has enabled me to do over the last 3 years is to get familiar with local government in a way that I never did before, because I was VFM Director for the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice, two of the most, how would you describe it, silo-based, Westminster-focused departments of all time. So it's been a wonderful experience over the last 3 years. So now let's think about data, live data, new data, information in thinking about it vis-a-vis devolution. Now I think the way that devolution is moving, with starting with the Wave 1 city deals, or even before that with community budgets in 2013, which I dare say everyone's forgotten about, but were a very useful precursor, I think. Moving to Wave 1 city deals, Wave 2 city deals, Devo deals, what we're seeing is gradually, and in a halting kind of way maybe, but the movement of powers, freedoms and flexibilities from Westminster to local areas at a regional footprint, so that that footprint is big enough to be able to answer the question of why our cities appear to be underperforming internationally, as Katrina very rightly pointed out. So if devolution is the answer to that question, you've got to be able to check that what's coming out of the devolution move is actually giving you what you want. So what we need first and foremost is a way of measuring what we're getting out of it. And before that, there's another thing. We need to know from the government, what is their vision? If devolution is the answer, if elected mayors are the answer, and combined authorities are the answer, what's the vision for 2020? Is there a basement room in 2 Marsham Street where there's a big plan? I don't know, because I haven't seen it. But we need to know what it is it that the vision is going to look like. And is it going to be, as they've started out, places with established governance, established histories of working together, with GM being the most obvious example? Or is it, as the LGA are pressing for, that everyone should get them, so we don't have a kind of devil take the hindmost? So the first thing we need to do is work out what it is that we're aiming at, and a good way of monitoring and evaluating it as we go along. Now, it's notoriously difficult to separate out what you're doing in local economic growth from one set of initiatives. But there are ways of doing it, so we need to think about what those measures are and start collecting that information and play it back in, because it's very important that we only fund, when funds are falling, we only fund things that actually work. So the government's what works centres are extremely important, and Henry Overman's people who are looking at local economic growth keep putting out reports on things that they've looked at properly and things that they can say has worked. What we then need to see is that being picked up by Devo areas, or indeed other ones, and investments being made in only those things that work. So there's a big role there for data. Now, the sub-aspect of that is we also have to have proper scrutiny and accountability of what combined authorities and officials are actually doing with money locally. So there are 4 principles that underlie a properly functioning accountability system. One is a clear objective of what you're doing, so that's why that's really important. The second thing is clear roles and responsibility. Who is being funded to do what and for whom, and what's the result of it? And you need a forum for accountability, and you need a shared language, so that if we're talking about job creation in Greater Manchester coming out of the Devo arrangements, we're measuring the same things as they are in, say, in the Liverpool City region, or indeed in Greater London, if you think about it, which has had devolution for longer than anybody else. So we need a shared language for that. Now, the second set of things I wanted to touch on was coming out, it's really a sort of the other side of it. We need to be very careful here about the money side of things. My advice to anybody embarking on a devolution deal and all that is follow the money. There are at least 4 different broad streams of money that are going into a so-called Devo deal. So I didn't mean so-called in a bad way, I just kind of meant it as a wrap-up term. It sounded a bit snotty there, it wasn't meant to be. So there's basically 4 different streams of money. There is new money. There is at least some new money, but make sure that you know no one's counting it twice, because that's always a bad thing, speaking as a professional auditor. So there's ESF money and other European funds. So what's going to happen to that? That's been raised already. There is the pooling of existing grants, mostly capital. These are very heavily infrastructure-driven kind of arrangements, which does leave you thinking about the skills aspect of it, but it's hardly touched in a lot of Devo deals. And then there's another broad package of money, which is kind of like revolving investment investment funds and that kind of thing, which hopefully will leverage in private sector investments. Now, all that is very complicated. You put that on top of a local government finance system, which is also very, very complicated. And at the moment, we're seeing a move to 100% business rate retention. So councils will be funded by council taxes, business rate retention, and any locally generated income that they can come up with. So that the question of growth is a very, very real one for local authorities, because it actually goes back to the heart of their financial sustainability long term. Are they going to be sustainable organisms and financially self-sustaining by 2020? So as part of the move to 100% business rate retention, we also, of course, have the question that it has to be fiscally neutral and the fact that councils will get more to do. So come 2020, you have your new quantum based on the new needs assessment, which is being worked up now, plus you have new responsibilities. So the question I would pose to finance director colleagues in the sector is, are you going to be sure that that equation doesn't work just on day one, but you've modelled it and you know at a very granular level that 1 year out, 2 years out, 5 years out, you're being given enough money, or you can raise enough money to do what you want to do and provide services for vulnerable people. So data there about the actual money that you've got coming in, your forward projections, modelling and all that is extremely important. And last but not least, I'll touch on the other side, thinking about demand management, about people particularly with very complex needs that will have to be supported longer term. We then have to think about how we're defining what we're doing with those services. So I think there's a real need to think about outcomes in a proper sense and being able to fund outcomes rather than outputs, which is a lot of what we do at the moment in adult social care. And I think that it's incumbent on authorities to draw on all the information on people and all the information that they have, as Deborah was talking about earlier, that they have access to. We did a piece of work last year on local welfare provision and what happened consequent to it being removed as a separate grant and being rolled into RSG. And one of the interesting things was there were quite a few authorities that we visited that saw people coming forward for kind of emergency aid, local welfare provision type stuff, as a single incident. But they tended, if you think about it, it tended to be coming from a lot of the same people in the same areas. So there was a chance there to build a much better case management system, because be sure, those people were also probably at risk of homelessness. They probably were in touch with children's services, and they probably were getting something from adult social care. So we have to pull that information to be able to not only work towards those people being much more independent longer term, because let's face it, resources are still shrinking towards 2020. But we may not see the abrupt falls that we've seen 10 to 15, but we are going to see another at least 8% reduction by 2020. So to get them living more independent lives, and more importantly, to think about things where it's going to cost you a huge amount of money to support people, say if children have to be taken into care, or you're looking at a family being at risk of homelessness. So just to sum up, I think that data is incredibly important, particularly in the situation we are at the moment, where we've got a number of different changes happening across the piece, and I'm not touching on policy developments that are happening elsewhere. And of course, we still have the I was going to say elephant in the room, it sounds a bit rude, so I shall just say universal credit and leave it at that. That's coming in as well. So it's very important that we have the data that we have to monitor what's happening, to see what good things are coming out of devolution, and to play back what works into the system. It's really important that we're all very clear about how much money we've got, where's it coming from, and what are the accountabilities attached to that. And last but not least, be very clear about the data that you do have, pooling it with other public bodies in the area, and using that to improve service outcomes for our most vulnerable clients. Thank you very much.